Welcome to the Parent Yap. I'm Maddie. I'm here with my co-host Emily, and we are yapping about divorce today with our friend Erin Levine from Hello Divorce.
Hey.
Hey, gals.
How are ya?
Thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited, mostly me, to talk about divorce today. We have so much to chat about, divorce in general, all kinds of marriage, postpartum topics. But first, we would love to hear a little bit about Hello Divorce and what you do.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. And I've been a lawyer forever. Let's see, about 20 years now. I built a law firm from the ground up at one point we had about 13 lawyers, you guys. So it was pretty major. But once I had kids, I didn't want to litigate anymore. I didn't want to fight anymore. More importantly, I started to dive a little bit deeper. What do I want my life to look like? What do I want to model for my children? And what I really found was this type of divorce that I was helping people through, this messy, litigious, expensive divorce, even though many times we came out with a typical, a win, it was actually really harming people emotionally, financially. The result didn't truly feel like a win. And I wanted to figure out a new and different way that I could help people reorganize their lives and their families in a way that make the most sense for them. How can we take this hope that you have when you're getting divorced for a better life and truly set a solid foundation for that going forward? And that was where the idea for Hello Divorce came from.
That is amazing. First of all, shout out to you. Cannot imagine running a law firm that big, but also I think female family or divorce attorneys are a special breed. I feel similarly about you and your fellow colleagues that I do about like nurses and teachers. You have to be so many things to your clients, and people are coming to you at usually their like darkest hour. So thank you for doing all of that because it is super needed and that is amazing. So did you dissolve your law firm or did you just kind of like slowly pivot? How did you make the switch from litigating divorce to this current setup?
So I scaled my law firm way, way back. But what I also knew was that regardless of how much technology we use, at some point throughout the divorce process, most people or a lot of people might need access to a lawyer. Right. So I didn't completely dissolve the firm. I just scaled it way back. And for quite some time, Hello Divorce was a side hustle. I wanted to make sure that we could actually build a product that people would use, that allowed us to automate the legal and financial logistics, not just in the county I was in or the state, which was California at the time, but could we build something that could scale to other states? So there were a lot of things that I had to prove out before I could really pivot full time into running Hello Divorce.
That's so awesome.
Do you see a gap in the market for this type of product or service during your time working with families? What problem did you identify and how did you go about solving that?
Yeah, so there were three big problems. One is the average cost of divorce in this country, if you can believe it, is $20,000 per person. Let me tell you why the average is $20,000, because only 25% of people have lawyers. So, it is much higher for most people who hire a lawyer. The second big problem is that it's so contentious. From the very beginning, paperwork, no matter what county or state you're in, says you are being sued. Spouse A versus spouse B. Yeah, causes this visceral reaction. Yes. And when you start out a divorce in fear and overwhelm and maybe shame, it never leads to positive decision making, and divorce is all about decision making. And then the third big issue was that divorce is a life transition. It impacts every aspect of our lives, from our health insurance plans to how and when we parent to where we live. And there was no one place you could go to get support for all of those things. So I looked around and I saw, of course, law firms, and then I saw these sites that prepare your forms. And there was nothing really in between that could support you. And so I guess just briefly what Hello Divorce is, it's a platform that allows you to complete your entire legal process for 90% less and in 1/3 the time of a traditional divorce. And we do that by automating most of the legal and financial logistics, which there is a ton. And then we bring in expert support as you need it. So as an example, a lot of people take advantage of our mediators to help resolve conflict and broker a deal that you can both live with. Some people take advantage of our financial advisors or our life coaches to help create an exit plan, one that isn't focused on screwing over your ex. It's focused on how do I set myself and my kids up for my best next chapter. So it's been a really exciting journey.
That is so amazing. And never, ever have I wished more I could turn back time, even just like a year, and use your service. Our listeners, our followers know that I am a single divorced mom. And yeah, everything you are saying about the divorce process was true for me and my ex-husband. It doesn't have to be as hard as it is. And it's incredible that there is a resource out there that even if you do need support going through your divorce, you can get it without spending a fortune. Yeah. Ladies who are listening, or lads who are listening, if you are thinking about divorce, check out Hello Divorce before you just call an attorney. In retrospect, I wish that's what I had done.
It leads us into a question I think, Erin, you probably get a lot or have heard a lot. And Maddie, I know you had personal, experience with, and I think probably everybody, or at least 90% of married couples have this thought go through their head, which is this like, I'm not happy, or I'm not always happy, or I'm often unhappy. What is the right amount of powering through that is normal? Should I stay? Should I go? Should I consider this? Should I bring it up? Should I not? Should I assume this is normal? What does that process generally look like for families? And I know you're not a marriage counselor, Erin, and that's right. And that's fine. But I can imagine that you have a lot of experience just talking through this process. And to our listeners with new babies or new young children, this potentially is even more heightened and more of like this kind of inner turmoil, stress. So like, again, what does that look like for families? What advice or what experience have you had sort of talking to people about this time of life?
Great question. It's so hard to know whether it's the marriage or the moment. There is so much happening, and you're trying to figure out whether it's relationship trouble or am I just super depleted? What's happening here? And then add on the part, at least for me, where you feel vulnerable. For me, it was like, I expected that breastfeeding would be so easy and no problem, and it was really a struggle, and I expected I'd have this perfect birth plan, which of course didn't happen. So I'm already feeling, whether it's reasonable or not, a lot of shame around it. And then now I don't feel supported in my relationship, and I'm not trusting my own judgment. So the first thing I'll say is that if you're feeling that way, you're not alone. And here's how I know. Because we've had over 10,000 people on our platform go through divorce, and most of them, their kids are 5 to 10 years old, and they have been considering divorce or trying to save their marriage for 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Right?
That sounds, dead on. I think all three of us can relate to those moments in early parenthood, regardless of where your marriage ends up, where you're thinking like, what have I done? What have I done? Did I marry the right person? Did I have kids with the right person? And am
I the same person that I was 12 years ago when we met? Like, so much has changed in life between kids, career, just evolving in so many ways.
Totally. I think that's such a good point too, because a lot of times I think of course, there's so much shame attached to thinking about divorce, going through divorce. And it doesn't always have to be because like you have a really crappy partner or you've done something horrible and to explode your marriage. It could just be like, whoa, I'm a different person and this relationship doesn't fit who I am anymore.
Yes.
I think
I can't tell you how often we see that, right? Where we see a couple where there was no big blowout, no big event like cheating or betrayal. It was really about, oh, wow, never have I been so clear that we are living two very different lives. I am risk adverse.
Yeah.
She loves risk and wants to start a startup when we have a brand new baby. It becomes a lot clearer, and then you have to ask yourself, if nothing changes, can I live like this in 5 years?
Right.
And I think sort of taking yourself out of backing up. You got to do a no shame self inventory.
Totally. I was just
Okay.
going to say, I would love to speak to this a little bit through my own experience and through very few friends that I have who have gone through it.
Great.
I think for me personally, very early on in the postpartum period with my first, I felt like zero chance that we are making it through.
Oh, you knew.
Well, it's interesting because did I know? And I think that's a question that is part of that very, very honest conversation you have to have with yourself. And I have always been comfortable having those honest conversations with myself. And I've always hoped to have relationships, whether they're romantic or friendship or at work, where open and honest communication is like a keystone of my relationships. So it was very hard in those early days when I was like, wait, is this me? Is this him? Is this the baby? You know, I had complicated labor and delivery, very complicated postpartum experience. When I had to return to work, postpartum depression hit me like a freight train. I ended up in an intensive outpatient hospital program. And so all of these things were happening. And in my mind, even though I felt like I was having really honest conversations with myself, I was also saying like, now is not the time to make this big decision. And I think the sort of pivot that I wish I had made and that I hope people listening will make is that you know in your heart if these problems were problems before you had kids. And for me, that was such an important piece of it after we had our second, is that, okay, these problems now were problems before we had kids. They just kind of switched to being kid-related problems because we're parents now and kind of all your problems are kid-related. And then things got a little better, worse, which I think a lot of people can relate to. And relationships, even healthy ones, are super up and down. But when I was finally able to have that real conversation with myself that, yeah, this isn't new behavior for my partner. These aren't new feelings for me. These aren't new life stressors we're going through. We are not compatible. And, you know, I think my ex-husband went through similar internal strife, really not wanting to get a divorce because of the shame and the feeling of failure. But I think that really is one of the biggest, I don't know if crux is the right word, but that is one of the biggest sort of differences, I think, that you can really ask yourself is like, are these brand new problems or were these problems pre-marriage, pre-kid? And I think that can really help to inform your decision. Do you feel, Erin, like that's something your clients go through a lot?
I'm going to be completely transparent. I haven't thought about it that way, but I love that analysis. I think it will be really helpful to talk people through that. And it does take some of that shame off your shoulders to think through it is what it is, right? I think, you know, sometimes it's challenging to even access that clarity.
Yeah.
And especially when so much is happening in the moment. And so I think another strategy, I love yours, and I will say that I can't tell you how many people do say to me something like, I knew walking down the aisle that this was not the marriage for me. And it's so painful, but I do hear that a lot. I think another strategy is what am I missing? And what do I want more of? And have I communicated these needs clearly? Because we don't get married hoping to get divorced, right?
Sure.
At least I hope not. We do want to see this marriage through. And if you don't have the type of clarity that Maddie just spoke about, just knowing intrinsically this, we were not meant to be, then what other type of analysis can you do? And I think it's, well, let's identify, do I feel heard and seen in this relationship? Do I feel safe being emotionally vulnerable? Am I relieved or am I heartbroken at the idea of it being the end of our relationship? And then from there, it gives you a real source of like, what can I connect with my spouse about? What can I share with them? How will this change? Because in some cases, it might make sense to bring that to their attention and see how, if they're willing to rise to the occasion. Because ultimately, you cannot save a marriage or grow a marriage unless both parties are willing to come to the table and be there and do the hard work.
Yeah. I think the hard work is such an important part of it. And I know, like you can speak to this too, as a still happily married person, mostly happily. Nick, we love you.
No. It's so interesting. Like, I actually had two questions coming out of what you were saying, Erin. The first is, when children are involved, which I think probably they often are, especially in the sort of background you gave, the concept of like, I'll put my own needs aside for my children, or like, it's okay, I'll tough it out because it's better for them. This is like a tape someone might play in their mind.
Yeah,
for sure.
What, like, does that prolong, is that the 3 to 5 years or the 2 to 5 or whatever it was that you were saying? Is that sometimes what's going through somebody's brain? Or like, how does that factor in? That was one of my questions. It's just sort of like this isn't even an option for me because I have children, and thus being married, and I'm not saying I believe this, but in someone's mind, I assume being married with children is better than being separated with children. And so like, how does that for both of you sort of come up, and how do you see that process looking?
No, I think that's a great question. And I think, Erin, you can probably speak more specifically to like the timeline of it. But for sure, that was a question I had for myself. And it's a question I get a ton from members. You know, we are so lucky at Joy to have mostly women, but men too, reach out and say like, I am struggling in my relationship. And as recently as last week, I did have a member ask me straight up, like, here's my scenario, should I stay or should I go? And of course, it's not our role to answer that question. Nobody can answer that question for you besides you. But I do think that for so long, we have been taught and told that two-parent household is the most important thing. Happy, healthy child rearing. And I say this for so many reasons, but this for sure is one of the reasons I feel so lucky to be raising kids in the time that I am, because now we know that actually, if you are raising kids in an unhappy two-parent home where one or both of the parents are like deeply unhappy in the relationship, where there's arguing, where there's bickering, God forbid it escalates to any point of that, it's actually much better for kids to be raised in a single-parent home or two single-parent homes where there is peace and harmony. So, Erin, I definitely want to hear your take on that too, but that is something to consider, and that is something that I tell anyone who asks me, is that I would take the risk of raising my girls as a single mom and deal with whatever outcomes that may be than ever put them through what would have been a really, really difficult life for them had my ex-husband and I decided to stay together for the kids.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an important point, and the research is really clear. Divorce isn't great for kids initially. Nobody wants to get divorced, but it's not divorce itself that destroys families and children. It's the prolonged tension and conflict.
Right.
It gets harder before it gets easier. But what I see in following a lot of these children over the last 5, 10, even 15 years is it also can teach them empathy, resilience, self-reliance, organization, self-love, confidence. There's so much good that can come from it as well.
Right? Like knowing your needs and being able to speak up for your needs, I can imagine would be your perfect thing for a role model to model for a child.
Yes. And you can know this intellectually, but you're right, Emily. Like, it is the biggest factor that especially moms and dads with small children consider, that along with finances, that along with the shame and family pressure, but really it's about the kids. This is not how I imagined our family to be. This is not how I imagined my life to be. And you truly have to, and I bet Maddie can relate to this, grieve the life that you thought you would have for them and for you.
Right.
And then you get to this point, especially with little kids. Little kids don't understand divorce, but they will absolutely feel the tension.
Right.
So if you stay in a marriage with constant tension, constant conflict, you are modeling the same issues coming up over and over again that you are unable to resolve. Like, is that the experience you want for your children? Or do you want to be a chance to show them free will, to model healthy relationship with yourself and with others? Because kids learn less by what we say and more about how we love, how we show up. So I think, those are things that we can ask ourselves.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just going to say, I love looking at it that way. And I appreciate how both of you who are in such different situations are both thinking about it that way. Obviously, as moms, we want to, all we think about is what we're teaching our kids. And, for me, I have 2 girls, so I'm very girl gang centered. I have 10 nieces. I'm very,
Nieces.
I do, I think at this point. I could do the count really quick. Some of them are my ex-nieces. I don't know how to refer to them anymore. They were once my legal nieces. Now they're my spiritual nieces. But, there has always been so much pressure on moms to kind of hold it together for the kids. And, I do think it's so important to show them those very things that hey, girl, you gotta do you, and you have to feel happy and confident and safe. And it's funny because, my ex-husband and I got separated when my oldest was 3 years old and my youngest was about 6 months old. And so my oldest really went through it, and we watched her go through it. And I kind of thought that our 6-month-old would just never know the difference, but she is 3.5 now, and she's going through it the same way my oldest did when it first happened. So they're going to experience mom and dad living separately, one of the parents perhaps having a new partner. They're going to experience those things no matter what at the ages that they happen. And so it really is so much about modeling, like you said, Erin, what healthy love looks like. And actually, I want to tell you guys this very quick, funny story because it's just so on brand for my divorce. And you'll be like, oh, sounds about right. My kids love the movie The Greatest Showman, and I introduced it to them a while ago. We're musical nerds, and they watched it at their dad's this week. And just yesterday, they came back from their dad's, and my oldest asked me, can we watch it tonight? And I was like, yeah, of course, we'll watch it, at bedtime, last day of school, whatever. And she was like, I don't think I want to watch the part where, Mr. Barnum kisses not his wife. And I said, okay, we don't have to watch that part. And she said, but he really was just kissing her to keep her around. And I said, oh, what? You don't kiss people to keep them around. Is the first thing I said. But second of all, where did you even hear that language? And she said, oh, Daddy said that's why he kissed her. And I said, in my head, oh, I bet that is why Daddy said he kissed her. And I said, oh, that's probably not what Daddy meant. I said, if you're married to somebody, you don't kiss other people without your wife's permission. That's not okay. And she was like, well, he's a good dad and husband anyway, though, right? And I said, well, what do you think? In my head, I'm like, the whole movie is about him being just this horrible, kind of narcissistic, self-centered, and then coming to see the light. And she was like, well, I think he's a good dad, whatever, blah, blah. So then we're watching the movie and, it's intended to show that he's being a bad guy and then he has his redemption arc. But every time it was clear that he was being a bad husband or a bad dad, she was like looking over at me and being like, well, that wasn't really good. And I'm like, you're right, that wasn't really good. And then at the end, when he's like running, really running to like get to his wife, she's like, he's running so fast because he loves her and he wants to fix it. That makes me want to cry. And I like really am going to try not to cry on this episode. But it's just so interesting because it's like, you know, she's processing it through like the movie and what the movie is telling her, and then like how her dad is explaining it, and then how I'm, you know, trying to like unexplain it. And, you know, these kids are just like taking in so much. And she's only 6.
And she loves the movie so much because it relates to her life probably, and it's because she wants to watch it 2 nights in a row because it makes sense to her, because it is relevant to what she's dealing with.
Yeah, she's like,
absolutely. We have, those conversations don't change. My kids, so girls, 10 and 13, we just rewatched Gilmore Girls from start to finish. And we had so many conversations about the different relationship dynamics there too. The goal, and I think we can all agree, you're in a little bit more of a teaching position. If I try to teach my kids at this point, they'll be like, bye mom, see you later. So really my goal is to get them to question, to get them to think through what feels reasonable or unreasonable to them. But I totally forgot where I was going with this, but you know, there's so much richness in that show, whether you love it or not. It's so relevant to these kids, and we've had a really good time with it. And that's a great way to help kids through divorce and healing as well, is don't avoid it. Right? I'm skipping ahead, but it popped up in my head and I felt like, oh, we need to talk. Like, we want kids to feel safe. One of the biggest mistakes I see is when both parties have so much anger and hatred and resentment towards each other that children can't talk about their other parent when they're with their mom or with their dad. Can you imagine compartmentalizing your life that way?
No.
Can you imagine that? It's so unfair.
I think about that so much. And, you know, if you do decide to go through marriage counseling before your divorce or as part of your divorce, or even just in counseling individually, which, in a surprise to no one who's listening, I recommend therapy. I can't recommend it enough. As a couple and or as an individual, if you're considering divorce, having that unbiased third party is so important. But I do think a big reason why you need to be able to unpack it yourself is so you can unpack it for your kids, because I cannot imagine, you know, my ex-husband and I had a very, very difficult divorce, and I will always love him. He's the father of my children, but we have a tough relationship daily, and we are working together every day to give our kids the best life that we can in the circumstances that we're in. And sometimes it's really hard. When I'm my angriest is when I say what a great dad he is to them the most, because he is a good dad, and it doesn't really matter anymore whether or not he was a good husband, or even what I think of him as a person, because he's their dad. And so, you know, I know that he gives me the same respect, and that is such a huge part of it, just being able to, you know, have those discussions.
Yeah, so it sounds like from both of you, the kid decision or the kid factor in the decision is a big one. But as a role model, as a parent, understanding your needs and modeling not what's best for your child just blanketly, like, oh, two married parents is best, but understanding really the reality of the situation, and understanding that choosing divorce does not make you a bad mom, or it doesn't mean you were a bad wife or partner. So I think that's probably a helpful nugget, that this does not put a label on you as failing or doing a bad job for your child or for your spouse. In fact, it potentially is the opposite, in that you understand your needs and you're the best for everybody. And so I was going to ask you, Erin, like, let's say we've gone through this process with ourselves. We've done this very honest reflecting. We've attempted to sort of repair, communicate, and it's clear that this isn't going to move forward, or it's best for everybody that it does not. What would you tell somebody in that moment where they've sort of decided, okay, It's not going to happen. It's not going to work. Now what? Because I can imagine there's no like checklist of like get divorced step 1, 2, and 3. Although I know your platform is attempting to sort of streamline all of that. Like, what does it look like in that moment for the next 6 months or so? Can you give us a little bit of like a timeline and a picture of that?
So, I mean, it really does vary from person to person. A lot of people want to take the time to get as prepared as possible, to understand the steps, to understand the basic laws in their state. And other people are ready to jump in and file as soon as possible. So I think I'll take a step back a little bit and just say how you start your divorce. How you start it lays the foundation for how it will go. And so if there's one thing you could do, because you are going to learn so much and there are going to be so many decisions that you have to make, and you don't need to know all of that stuff yet. What you do need to focus on is what is the approach I am going to take? Because it used to be that you lawyer up and you fight. That is the only way, or was the only way, to truly protect your rights and to feel confident that you're taking the right step forward. There will be conflict. That's normal, but it doesn't have to become an all-out war. And you don't get to control how your spouse walks through this process. You simply get to control how you exit the marriage in integrity, in full heartful integrity, as calm as possible within the chaos, so that you can support your kids all the way through. Because that's another piece of research, right? As long as your children have one calm, safe, loving, stable home, they also do quite well.
Right.
So when it gets to this approach, what are my options, and understanding them? Mediation, hiring a lawyer. You don't need to make all these decisions all at once. You do need to start to think, what are my options moving forward? I think that's really important.
Yeah, I love looking at it that way, because I think for so many people in the situation that Em is describing, it's like, okay, I've done the personal audit. We've done what we can. This marriage, I have to get out of this marriage. It is super overwhelming for many, many reasons. And it can feel like the best, easiest thing to do is just like get a lawyer and get going. And for me personally, and I think for a lot of people, you're not thinking that, oh, this could go. I mean, some people are already in very difficult situations and know it's going to be tough no matter what. A lot of people, I would hope that the majority, are thinking like, okay, this is a solution to a problem. How bad could it really be? You hear horror stories, but that could never be me. It could never be us.
Well, because you're starting at a place where you're unhappy.
Right.
You're not,
your emotions are heightened.
You're not getting a divorce because everything's going well. You're getting a divorce because there's problems. So you're starting depleted, and you're starting angry, and you're starting guilty and sad. So like, you're not like, this is going to be awesome. Like, right?
So your biggest challenge is to, every time you make it about your ex, and you will a lot, because they will do a lot of unreasonable, maybe even vicious things, you have to turn it around to, what can I do to help me set myself and my children up for the best foundation moving forward? And you can do that in two ways. The first is, to the extent possible, set some ground rules early on. Set some ground rules with your spouse. It could be, we're going to do our absolute best to keep this out of court. It could be, here's how we'll pay expenses pending an agreement with our divorce. It could be, we are going to try mediation to see if we can resolve this stuff without having to lawyer up. It can be, we will decide all kid-related stuff outside the presence of the kids. We will not talk about any of this stuff in front of them. If you can set some ground rules, that's really going to help both of you. It's going to start to build a little trust along the way. And if you can't, if your spouse is like, no way, no how, I'm not talking to you about this, lawyer up, then that also gives you a good sense of what you have in front of you and how to best prepare.
Right.
And then the second thing you want to do is, or that is advisable, is really get clear on your goals. What are my goals going forward? Is it to destroy my spouse? Is it to set a financial foundation? Is it to protect my children? What are those goals? And every decision that comes before you, because there will be a lot, you have to ask yourself, is this getting me closer to those goals?
Those are such great ways to frame the process and such good questions to ask yourself. I feel like you could and should have a little checklist like that. I think even maybe some of those questions could even inform your decision to move forward in some situations. I love that. Gosh, I'm just like thinking back personally and I'm like, wow, I really wish, somebody had had these conversations with me. We've talked about this a little bit outside of this episode, but I think it can be so isolating when you do decide, or even if your marriage is on the rocks, that can feel very isolating. Making the decision can feel like you're doing it in a vacuum. And then going through the process, if you don't have friends who have gone through it before, or no one in your family has gone through it before, you are kind of an unwilling trailblazer. And that can be really difficult. I think, having your own back by setting those standards at the beginning, I think is such a great way to do it, because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, divorce touches everybody. And so you may be the first one of your friend group or the first one in your family to go through a divorce, but the stats don't lie, girls and boys.
And tell us what that looks like in our country. I know you have a lot of this research. What's going on?
I think every big life event, and divorce is considered a massive life event, the second most stressful event after the death of a spouse. We do in community, right? We do births, we celebrate, we have baby showers with engagements, we have parties with weddings, it's a huge production. With funerals, we have rituals. We come together for all of these big life events, except divorce.
Whoa,
We're mostly alone.
Yeah, that's a crazy realization. So true. Yeah.
We live our whole life in community, but we do divorce in isolation. And I think that we can do so much better as a society, as a friend, as professionals. We can step up, we can normalize, like you both are doing, talking about divorce without shame, offering support before the paperwork is filed. That's why we have a planner and tools on Hello Divorce as well. Recognize that divorce can be an empowering choice, not a failure.
Right.
And creating space for grief and hope. Let our friends dream, not just, wallow in this sort of misery.
Yeah.
And that there is a future where this is different, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like in every case, because you're approaching this from that place where something's not working, that you're taking the steps to get to a place where in 6 months, a year, whatever the timeline is, things will look different for you and your family.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah.
It looks so different through the whole process. I think, future looking is always so great, because no matter what you're going through, you will get to the other side of it. And divorce is no different. I also think it's so important to take it day by day. Depending on what your situation is, even if you feel like you're done and dusted, the courts get backed up. You might not be through your process, and it might be out of your control when your divorce is finalized. And those things can feel really overwhelming. So yes, you will come out on the other side of this, hopefully as unscathed as possible, but giving yourself the grace, like Erin was saying, to grieve and to seek support and to ask friends for help and to just sort of go through the experience as you're going through it with as much self-love and self-grace as you can muster.
I have a question for you, Maddie. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but do you feel like a different human after coming out of this? Do you feel like there was an element of growth that you wouldn't have achieved without the separation? Tell us a little bit now that you're still in it, but
right,
that you've had a little bit of space from the hardest part.
I appreciate that question so much. Yes, I do. You mentioned earlier about it can be a really empowering process, and it has been for me. I say this all the time. These past 3 years have been by far the hardest years of my life, and I've also never been happier. So going through the separation, my ex-husband moving out, going through, dealing with the transitions with my kids and their experience with it and then my own lived experience has been, I don't know, I still don't really have a really succinct way to describe it. And I would do it again in a heartbeat to be where I am today. I do ask a lot people who have been through it or going through it or are further down the road than I am if the relief ever comes. I really expected to feel a lot more lasting relief. Like, I walked out of court, we got legally divorced on Halloween. It was a very tough day. And then we had to trick or treat together about 5 hours later. And so I had about like 2 hours of like, wow, I just did that. Like, I did it. I am divorced. It is over. And then very quickly it was like, no, it's not. So the legal part is over, but figuring out what life is going to look like is ongoing. There is some light at the end of the tunnel. So I think I have felt like a different person a few times throughout the process, and I definitely feel like one now. I'm excited for the next new person I become, which is someone who is experiencing the relief of the decision. And I think, that's a process too. Maybe it'll be next week and maybe it'll be in 5 years. Who knows? But I am looking forward to that part of it.
The best part is that you continue to grow. Like,
totally.
I don't know whether it's the startup founder in me or just who I am, or if everybody experiences this, but I have to do one thing every day that either makes me feel alive, like truly alive, or taking one step towards a little bit of personal or professional growth. Like, that to me is the most special part of walking through this world. And when I see my divorcing clientele really do the hard work, because a lot of times I'll have people that say, how come he or she is just like so able to move on? They're already dating someone. Life is so easy for them. They're so happy. Hey, it'll come. It'll come crashing down, and hopefully not on their deathbed, because they're not doing the work. But if you do, and when you do the real work, and you go deep and you sit in that pain, man, I've never seen brighter and better lives come out of that. And that's where you're headed as well.
Thank you for saying that. It is so nice to hear. And I believe that in my heart. Every day feels a little bit brighter. If you're listening to this episode and you're on the other side of it, your partner has asked for divorce and you don't want it and you feel blindsided or like, no, you want to make this relationship work, what can you do?
I think, if there's one thing, if you're on the other side of it and your spouse wants a divorce, the only thing that you can possibly do to potentially change their mind is to focus on you and your growth and your relationship with your kids, because there's nothing like sexier, more beautiful, more inspiring than seeing someone who can and does do that. And it's hard and it's painful, and it still doesn't mean that you are compatible. But if you're going to give your life a try and your marriage a shot, then you really just have to show up every day and be willing to sit with the hard stuff and work through it.
It goes back to kind of just learning every day. The things that I have learned through separation and divorce are things that I apply in friendship, at work, strangers on the street. Like, so many life skills come up in this process, and doing that work internally is going to make your life better, whether you end up divorced or not.
100%. It's not about fixing the past. It's about building your future. And you don't have to be fearless. You just have to keep moving forward. That's it. Just keep
one step at a time.
Are there any other, just as a founder, someone who's been through this themselves personally, Erin, someone as a lawyer, are there any other, I don't know, either tips, hacks, little sort of like, do this thing, this easy thing that would help save you time, money, blah, blah, blah. Is there any advice just sort of like on the micro level that you might want to give to a parent or a partner entering this process?
Yeah, I think that it is important to, whether you decide to go the lawyer up and fight route or a more collaborative process, to understand the general law in your state. And that's not very hard to do anymore. It can be simply, asking our chatbot, Hallie, or asking ChatGPT, do I live in a community property state or an equitable distribution state? And what does that mean?
I don't know. No idea.
Right?
How would I know that?
Right?
I don't
So
even
to
know
start...
what that, I wouldn't even know to ask that.
Ask that question. Okay, fair enough. Well, I mean, one thing that you can easily do is download our free guide at Hello Divorce, and it will take you through all the stuff that you need to start thinking about and the paperwork that you need to gather and the questions that you need to be asking. That's a great way to get started, and it doesn't have to be with us, but getting an initial checklist and starting to understand what's the legal framework in my state will help manage your expectations. Because you might have really big feelings about it. You might have really big feelings if you're the one who earned the 4K that, wait, I'm going to have to share this? Or, wait, there's a strong likelihood that my spouse who wasn't really present for the kids during our marriage is going to get a lot of time with our kids.
Yeah.
Right? So sort of starting to manage our expectations.
I can imagine that there are things you have to decide that you wouldn't have ever thought you would even have come up, right? Like, everything, I assume every single thing gets aired and discussed and discussed in a way that might feel uncomfortable. I can imagine that that's true.
It is, but let me just add one more thing here. And I want everyone to know that unless there's an emergency, unless there is a extreme emergency where your kids have been kidnapped or you've been cut off from every last penny, you will have time. You will have time to think through every decision and get educated or talk to the right expert before you make up your mind. Even if your spouse is pushing for a faster timeline, you hold a lot more control than you might think you do, and take the time you need to really understand the decisions that you're being asked to make.
Can I just ask one question that I think would be helpful for families? And again, not right or wrong answer. And I can imagine this would be emotional, Maddie, to think about. But framing this decision to your children, when and how do you talk about this with your kids in the healthiest of ways?
That is a great question. And like you said, I think it definitely varies by age. If you have babies, toddlers, little kids, it's going to be very different than it is if you have teenagers or even adults. For me, it was doing a lot of the things we talk about at Joy, which is like social stories. I got books, living with mom, living with dad. And then we just sat down and had a really honest, open conversation with our oldest, saying, mommy and daddy love each other, but we love each other as friends. And daddy's going to go live at his own house and mommy is going to stay here. And you guys are going to see both of us all the time. And that conversation was, as you can imagine, the most gutting that you'll have, but it made everything after that so much easier because she had a framework for it. And I also can't recommend enough, again, and I know Erin just said this, download Hello Divorce, but reach out to the experts. I talked to my pediatrician about it because that's who I had as a resource in the very, very early moments of my decision. And he is a 75-year-old man, but had great little nuggets and also had great resources for me. Because I was the first one in my friend group, I'm still the only one in my friend group to have gone through divorce. And the people who I know that are divorced have older kids. So, that was my lived experience. But I think being as honest as soon as possible just sets the whole family up for success.
What do you think, Erin?
Did the two of you talk about it together? There's lots of subsequent conversations. I do know that in our experience, for example, we shared the news and the kids were like, okay, well, are we still going to go get ice cream?
Right.
And then the conversation came later, why can't we just be a family again? And I don't like going back and forth. So there's lots of stuff that comes up that we work with. When you had that initial conversation, I'm curious whether you chose to do it together or if you even had that option.
We did choose to do it together. I'm trying to think of a positive word and not a negative one. I have been steadfast in the decision to discuss this with our girls together no matter what. And continue to do so. It's been hard because the girls will bring stuff up to me that they just wouldn't and don't bring up to their dad, which is natural in a happy, healthy marriage. So subsequently, I've had to have a lot of conversations with them by myself about it. But I always let my ex-husband know that I am having those conversations, and that if they have the same questions for him, that my expectation is that he's going to have those open and honest conversations with them too. Goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, divorce is messy. Divorce is hard. It is going to be in the best of circumstances, and your outcome, but more importantly, or equally important, I should say, your kid's outcome is going to depend on how you have those conversations.
That's great advice. And I know I turned it around on you. It's not my podcast, so forgive me there.
No, I love it.
To answer, Emily, your question, I agree that it really depends on the age, and you want it to be an age-appropriate conversation. And to the extent possible, you want your spouse to be there, at least for that initial conversation. But with these young kids, what's probably most important is they will internalize like they did something wrong. So we want to get them talking whenever possible. We don't want them to retreat, and we want them to know this is a grown-up decision. They had nothing to do with it. They didn't cause it. There's nothing that they could have done to stop it. And we both love you very, very, very much. Hard questions don't mean that you're failing.
Right.
They mean that your child feels safe enough to talk to you, and you don't need perfect answers, just grounded ones. Just do your best, because we're all amateurs in this. We're all amateurs in parenting and in life. So just do your best there. And if you can, create some new rituals, maybe redesign their space, get them involved in it. There's no reason why we can't also make a little bit of this hopeful and fun too.
Totally.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about this for 10 hours, and I'm sure we could. That's why we call this yapping, because we could yap forever. But I would love to leave it with that notion that while divorce is the hardest thing you will likely go through in your life, it can still be a beautiful process, and you can create a beautiful family unit that is the right fit for you and your kids, and that can look however you want. And there are parts that are fun, there are parts that are great, and you're becoming a new person, your kids are becoming new people, and there are experts like Erin, like the people at Joy, who are here to support you along the way, just like your friends and family. So, Erin, thank you so much for your time. This was incredible.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And you are a good parent when you have these thoughts and conversations.
Yes. And whether you decide to get a divorce or not, you are a good parent. If you are thinking about your kids in this situation, you're a good mom, you're a good dad.
All right, Mads, we have
Great.
a tradition where we wrap this up with a little fun, silly bow, huh?
So we wrap this up. Erin is going to send us off with our slogan for this episode.
Yapping about divorce. It's not about fixing your past. It's about building your future.
Woo! We love it. That is beautiful.